operational excellence and the increased probability of being able to accomplish those strategic goals. The whole premise behind this is CIRM has created a value proposition. It is essential to deploy that in order to accomplish the mission and the goals of Proposition 71. Today, I'd like to give a transition plan update. Next slide, please. I don't have control of the slides. And I'll be giving a more even up-to-date accounting for where we are on our 2016-2020 strategic plan. Suffice it to say that we're 90% or more of the way there, and in most cases, we will either reach the strategic goals of building the portfolio, accelerating, and essentially changing the paradigm of how we're able to get these programs through quicker, as well as chart new regulatory pathways along with the FDA to do so, as well as we've seen validation in terms of our programs maturing to the state of bringing value, so that they've brought in over almost $8 billion in industry investment, validating the technologies that CIRM has brought in many cases from the early stages through. Next slide, please. And where we are today is the CIRM team is continuing to execute very aggressively on this plan. And in addition, is managing the COVID crisis that we're in the midst of. Continuing, that hasn't slowed down our ability to achieve our strategic plan, because there have been many provisions put in place, including a way that we work with our grantees very actively to make sure where possible their research can continue. And while still being fiscally responsible in terms of what that means. In addition, we've funded 12 new projects in 2020 and are continually managing 174 awards. Just by way of background, because I was asked this, CIRM has awarded 1,058 programs, totaling almost 2.7 billion. So of that total, what's still under active management is 854 million, which is a value of 174 awards thus far. As you know, that we have a special COVID funding opportunity that was launched as a recurring 2-week review cycle. So the organization, the review team, and all the supporting departments have been supporting this very aggressive timeline. That program announcement has brought in 70 applications since we launched it. And so far, as of today, with the application review subcommittee approval of 2 additional awards, we have 11 awards under that COVID program announcement. We also have a sickle cell MOU joint funding program with the NHLBI to accelerate cures using cell gene therapy for sickle cell. And we currently have 5 clinical programs, one of which is co-funded with the NHLBI. Three additional promising cell gene therapy programs are underway in the pipeline, expected in Q3, Q4. The team is actively working with the applicants on these, and these would be coming in for a joint NHLBI CIRM clinical trial. The strategic planning process is in place to just put a framework around it so that the board can engage and determine where to go with elements that could potentially be something that's brought forward should that initiative go through to the new administration and board. Next slide, please. So with those activities, this is where we are today in terms of what budget we have available to us. We have $47.1 million in available, and I wouldn't say unallocated, I'm sorry, that their budget, but $47.1 million. Some of them are allocated for certain programs such as sickle cell and COVID, but there are also unallocated funds in the form of recovered funds. I've said here return funds. In this case, this is a result of a loan payback. And so that is something that is now going to be going out in terms of the process of review, funding, and launch and management that is expected to occur between now and the end of the year. The total available, and by the way, the research budget is not the topic of today's conversation, but it will be brought to the ICOC meeting on June 26th to determine what the board would like to do with the current unallocated budget, research budget. In terms of the total available budget for operations, I want to just set terminology in place. In the past, we have referred to things as little bucket, big bucket, but for the purposes of budgeting now, what we have done is call it operational budget. Little bucket was administrative budget, and then legal and things under legal, such as grants management, were previously derived from the big bucket. Well, they are derived from the big bucket, but it was previously presented that way. For sake of clarity, the total operational budget, which combines the little bucket plus whatever other personnel costs come out of the big bucket, are now represented in this available $28.9 million that is available, that is remaining under the Prop 71 bond allocation. And I won't go through these are just general categories. Sheila will go through it in much more detailed fashion, of course, because those are subject to board approval with each budget cycle. Next slide, please. So this is the transition plan budget. And I put on this chart in blue on the top of the 3 rows, what was presented in November 2017 as projected little bucket at the top, and it's italicized because it's been converted by our finance team to what that meant in terms of operational budget, which is in the second row of numbers. And so those were the projections going from the transition plan presentation in 2017, projected out to 2023. As you'll recall, we budgeted all the way to 2023 in order to manage all the awards to their completion that would be awarded through 2020. The very bottom row is the updated transition plan operating budget. 17, 18, 18, 19 and are both actual numbers, and 19, 20 is the projected, and what we project we will end the year with. It's pretty close. As you can see, the budgeted amount in the projection was more than that in the actual expenditures. That has allowed us to maintain a certain level of personnel. That has allowed us to continue the operational work, the operations, and the accomplishments that I had reported on previously. We'll report on more extensively at the board meeting. And so that tees us up for what will be presented today by Sheila, the 12.3 million, which includes some one-time wind down costs, and she'll speak to that in more detail. But then you'll see that there's a significant drop in budget, and what that represents is, as you'll see from Sheila's presentation, the 2021 budget is divided into 6-month intervals that mirror the planned wind down. So from June to December of 2020, there will be a larger budget than there is from January 2021 to the end of June 2021, which is the second half of that fiscal year budget. And that wind down in large part, that reduction in budget in large part is due to approximately 42% reduction in the CERM team. And then after the June 2021 period, assuming a wind down, there'll be an additional 47% reduction in the remainder of that team. And that team, which we call the closeout team, will continue through the subsequent years and are budgeted as shown in this chart. If no, I'm going to go ahead to the next slide, and then if that's okay, and then we can take questions. So what are the activities that will occur during this wind down process? So as you'll recall, there is a sharp reduction in personnel. We're proposing to the board that sharp reduction occur at the end of December. So by the beginning of 2021, there will be a personnel representing approximately a reduction of 42% of the current staffing. And those remaining personnel will be engaged in the categories of activities. It will be an aggressive timeline, but the CERM team will need to come up with a solid operations plan that the closeout team can execute on, which includes the transfer of all projects, handling of all of wrapping up contracts that need to be, handing off of contracts that need to continue, coming up in conjunction and partnership with the state, what that handoff to the state would be of all the different responsibilities. And we expect that that would be a staged handoff with a final handoff once the agency finally closes. And so that all needs to be in place because the closeout team is comprised of a very small number of full-time employees with some anticipated part-time to assist. And then in the phase 2 part, the closeout team would manage the remaining awards, execute in the operations plan, manage all of the obligations that agency would still continue to have laid out in the operations plan, and then finalize the agency closure in 2023. That concludes my portion of the presentation. I'm happy to take any questions at this point.
I don't see any hands.
Are there any questions or no questions, Maria?
I don't see any hands, but I don't know if the board has any questions, but they haven't raised their hand.
So let's see, I don't know if this is the right time to ask questions, sorry. So I had some sort of both detailed and philosophical questions. For example, what is the actual last date, end date of currently existing grants? Are we planning to grant no cost extensions? Same question for sickle cell program. So I have a few others, but maybe start from there.
Those are the type of discussions we'd like to have with the board at the upcoming ICOC meeting when we bring up the budget and the plan for our research programs. So if that's sufficient for now, we'd like to bring a more complete consideration for the board to discuss at the June 26th meeting. Thank you.
Christina, if you have specific questions, you can send them in advance, so that way we know to have that prepared for you.
Okay, that sounds great. Thanks.
Any other questions from any other member of the committee? All right, if not, then I'm going to turn to Sheila. I see it's already on the screen to present the proposed 2020/2021 fiscal year budget.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to present the 2021 budget request. So now looking at slide number 3, I just want to briefly go over the agenda. So the presentation this afternoon will cover the 1920 fiscal year, which ends on June 30th. We will look at what was allocated to us by the board to spend for this fiscal year, where we expect to end the fiscal year, and what drove those results. I then will review our 2021 request with you, as well as share with you the funds that are available to support our operations through the 2023 fiscal year. And then in your package, you were also provided with an appendix that provides the cost center department budget detail for each of our cost centers. So first, moving on to slide number 5, and first looking at the 1920 fiscal year. So this chart here provides us information on the 1920 budget and where we expect to end the year. So as the first column reflects, for the 1920 fiscal year, we were provided a budget allotment of just over $15.6 million. We expect that we will end the fiscal year, which is reflected by the second column, at about $13.7, $13.8 million. And then the last column reflects the variance, the savings and overruns in the budget. And as you can see, we expect to have a savings of just under $2 million. As is also reflected in that last column, we had savings pretty much through all of our expenditures, categories of expenditures, with the largest savings of dollar amount savings being in 3 categories. And I'd like to talk over those 3 areas briefly now. So looking at the pie chart on slide number 6, these are the areas where we saw the largest dollar savings. They were in employee expenses, in external services, and in reviews, meetings, and workshops. So next, I'd like to just go over each one of those and talk about why we had those savings. So looking at employee expenses, when we submitted the budget and it was approved, it included 40 positions to support our approved strategic plan. We are currently at 33 positions. So as those 7 positions vacancies occurred throughout the fiscal year, instead of filling those positions, we redirected the workload of those positions to existing positions. This resulted in savings of almost $1 million. But what's more important is that we were able to provide our existing staff with opportunities to gain more skills. So we had a win-win in 2 different areas here. So now looking at the next categorical area, our external services on slide number 8. As you know, we have several contracts in place to support like our GWG reviews, our ICOC meetings, legal, just to name a few. So when we hold in-person meetings, we incur expenses for such things as AV services and what have you. Well, during the 1920 fiscal year, we were faced with a pandemic. When COVID-19 hit, we had to find new ways to continue operations without in-person meetings. So all of our teams across the organization immediately went to work to implement new methods for holding meetings. Not only did these methods prove to be very effective, as we've learned from having ICOC meetings on Zoom and Ring Central, but we were able to have some cost savings as well. In external services, as you may be aware, over the years, the last few years, our legal team has gotten smaller and smaller, and we're now down to one attorney. So to ensure that Ben has the resources that he needs to fulfill his legal responsibilities, the 1920 budget did include some contingent funds to support any specialized legal service that we might need. Most of the contingent funds that were budgeted for did not materialize. And so as a result, that contributed to the overall savings in this area as well. So we probably spent about 75% of the budget, and we are probably anticipating about a $350,000 savings in this area. So now looking at our reviews, meetings, and workshops. In this area, we're anticipating about a 33% savings, or about somewhere between $275,000 to $300,000 savings. So why is that? So the 1920 budget planned that we would hold some meetings in person, some reviews, meetings, workshops, CAPS, TAPS in person, and others would be held telephonically. However, this was another area that was impacted by COVID-19. Reviews that normally are held in person, CAPS that are normally held in person, could no longer take place because of the travel restrictions and social distance requirements. But our teams were not to be deterred. Not only did we hold all of the scheduled reviews, CAPS and TAPS, but our team introduced new reviews, the COVID reviews, and they were able to do all of this by savings overall. And we did budget for some workshops and meetings that did not materialize during the fiscal year. And so that also contributed to the savings in this area. So that covers the majority of the savings in the 1920 fiscal year. And so I'd like to now move on to the 2021 proposed budget. So looking at slide number 11. Thanks, Doug. So as Steve mentioned earlier, the budget that I am about to present is different from the budgets that we've presented in the past. As Dr. Milan mentioned earlier, we have very limited funds for awards. So we have approximately $47 million left to make new awards. So for the first half of the 2021 fiscal year, so from July through December, we will continue our current operations. We will continue to fund COVID-19, sickle cell, and other awards as approved by the board. We will continue to manage our various portfolios. So the budget for the first half of the fiscal year supports the resources we need to do this and maintains our current staffing levels. The second half of the budget assumes that we will not have any new additional funds. Given this, we will have to implement a wind down. And the wind down will really occur in two phases. The first phase will occur at the end of December. We will then begin wind down activities. And then the second phase will occur in June of 2021. And then we will be reduced to a closeout team that will begin from July 21st through the 23-24 fiscal year. So next I want to just talk about some of the wind down costs that are included in the budget request. So one of the major wind down costs that is included in this budget is for our funds for leave buyout. So what is this, you may ask? Well, the state of California provides an annual leave program for its employees. So employees earn anywhere between 15 to 20 hours a month, depending on how many years they have in state service. And the program is really meant to cover any type of leave that an employee may need. So they can use this leave for vacation, they can use it for sick leave, they can use it to care for a family member, or if they have themselves a catastrophic event. But the program also provides that when the employee is separated from state service, the state must provide a cash payment to the employee for any leave that they may have on the books. The state does recognize this as a contingent liability, and so does CIRM each year, as we included in our audited financial statements. Another area where we anticipate we will see some expenses in the disposing of our assets. Because we are a state agency, we have to follow very specific protocols for asset disposal. So if the assets are reusable, we must turn them over to the state so that they can either redistribute them to other state agencies or they can sell them. In meeting this requirement, there are several steps that we must undertake. So some of the costs associated with asset disposal is the CIRM staff time that is going to be needed to prepare for the asset disposals. So one example is for disposing of computers and telephones. Because of the sensitive information that these pieces of equipment may contain, we're required to go through a pretty extensive sanitation process for each and every piece of computer and telephone equipment. When we dispose of furniture, it has to be inventoried, it has to be evaluated to see if it's usable, and then we have to prepare paperwork for all of this. The paperwork then gets submitted to the Department of General Services. They tell us where they want us to send the equipment, and then we have to make arrangements to deliver that equipment. And we have to hire movers, and that of course is at our expense. So there is money in the budget for those types of things as well. And then finally, earlier Dr. Milan covered the various wind down activities that some of our team members will undertake during the second half of the fiscal year. So this is going to require that we retain a small group of staff between January and June to perform these tasks. So the salaries and benefits for these positions are part of the wind down cost. So now looking at the dollars and the budget request on slide number 13. So this chart breaks up the budget in the two halves. So as I mentioned earlier, the first half of the year, July through December, we will continue business as we have now with this current staffing level. And that request is for just under $7.2 million. In December, we will implement the first level wind down and we will have a reduction. And then in January, we will start wind down activities and portfolio management as we are now. And that request is for $5.2 million. So the total request as reflected in the last column is for just over $12.3 million. So I do want to point out one thing. I talked just briefly earlier about those wind down costs for the leave buyout. I have separated them in this chart. If you will look at row 2 there, you can see that I've included the leave buyout. It's split out by 2 years because the wind down is going to happen in 2 phases. And so those costs associated with the payout in December are included in the first half, and then the costs for the second half are included, or that will occur in June, are included in the second half of the request. So looking at the budget in comparison to where we expect to end the 1920 fiscal year. So this chart shows that we think we're going to end the fiscal year, as is reflected in the first column, at about $13.7, $13.8 million. And our budget request is for just over $12.3 million. So how does that compare year to year? So moving on to the next chart, page 15, slide 15, sorry. So for current year, we had authorized $15.6 million. We think we're going to spend somewhere around 13.7, 13.8. So just under $2 million of savings we will have. But looking at the 2021 fiscal year, so the 2021 budget request $11.1 million for operation expenses, plus that $1.2 million for that one-time leave buyout. So making it a total of $12.3 million. So the year-end forecast for 1920 is about $13.7, $13.8 million. So that's about, the budget request is about $1.4 million lower than where we expect to end the fiscal year, even with a one-time cost. So now I want to just briefly talk about some of the major drivers of the 2021 budget request. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of the budget does support the myriad of activities, the wind down activities that will occur during the January through June phase. And that will enable us to put things in place so that we can manage our awards through the 23-24 fiscal year. We will experience a slight increase in facilities costs in the 2021 fiscal year, and that is due in part because increases are contained in the lease that we signed back in 2015. We have annual increases every year. And we do have some contingent funds in the 2021 fiscal year, just like we did in 1920. As I mentioned earlier, we do include contingent funds for our legal shop because we've eliminated positions, and sometimes there is a need for specialized services that we may not have in-house. And so having these contingency funds allows us to be able to procure those services should we need them. We also don't know whether we'll have more recovered funds, and if we do, we've included a small amount for reviews should we need to hold review meetings to disperse more recovered funds. But if the recovered funds don't materialize beyond those we've identified today, then of course we won't hold the reviews and those funds will not be used. Next, I just want to talk about, Dr. Milan did talk about this in her presentation as well, the funds that we have available for operations. My numbers are different because I start with July 2019 and hers were as at the end of this fiscal year. So on July 1st, we had just about $42.7 million. We expect to end the 1920 fiscal year at about 13.7, 13.8. The budget request is for $12.3 million for the 2021 fiscal year. And then from 21-22 fiscal year through the 2024 fiscal year, we estimate that we will need about $16.6 million. So as you can see, with the funds that we have available, that will be sufficient to cover our expenses through that timeline. So this really concludes the budget presentation. As I mentioned earlier, we did provide you with an appendix for your review that includes the details for each of the cost centers. We request your approval of our 2021 proposed budget. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I thank you for the opportunity to present the budget request.
Thank you very much, Sheila. Excellent presentation. Is there a motion to approve the proposed, to recommend to the board the proposed budget that Sheila just presented?
So moved. It's Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff. And is there a second to that motion?
Second, Christina.
Thank you, Christina. We have, it's been moved and seconded that we approve the budget as presented by Sheila. Are there any questions or comments about the budget as presented? Maria, is there anybody raising their hand that you can see?
No board members are raising their hands, no.
Is there any public comment with regard to the budget that has been moved and seconded?
If there's if there are people who would like to make public comment, they should dial.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, Maria?
If members of the public would like to make comment, they should press *9 and raise their hand so we can call on them.
Thank you.
So let's just give it a moment. I see a public comment from 805-284-8700.
All right.
Yeah.
So you have 3 minutes, please. Go ahead. What's your comment?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. This is Dave Jensen with the California Stem Cell Report. And I'd like to comment a little bit on the wind down plan apropos of what Maria Milan laid out. And one of the fine accomplishments of the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine has been the openness and accessibility of its vast array of information, largely through its website, but also via other means such as Facebook and other resources. Whether the initiative to refinance CIRM wins approval or not, CIRM has had a significant impact on the field. Its history should not be lost, as can easily happen to state agencies that just fade away. That brings me to the wind down plan presented to you today. The brief outline on the agenda does not contain an element to ensure that the complete history of CIRM will be preserved. Such a component, however, may well already be part of the wind down timetable. If not, it should be. CIRM's history has significant value.
Francisco Prieto. Robert Quint.
Well, I don't know.
Sure.
Roulette.
It sounds like somebody's got.
Sheeny.
Here.
Oscar.
Yeah.
Maria. David's got the floor.
Torres.
There's something going on in the background.
Diane
That's all.
Whitaker.
That's from earlier today. I don't know
But
why
I
it's
see
playing right
you,
now.
so I'm going to mark you as present.
Can we get that to stop, please?
Okay, you two, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Maria. This is the latest in a series of meetings we've been
Hey,
having,
Doug, can you mute?
COVID-related projects.
I'm looking at.
Okay.
Well, I'm sorry about this. Obviously, technical difficulties. Yeah.
That's okay.
No, you have something very interesting to say, and I apologize that unfortunately you've been interrupted. So please continue, and hopefully you won't be interrupted again.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. As I was saying that, about the component for sort of preserving the history is an important element, I think, in the wind down. As I continue here, CIRM's history has a significant value for historians, policymakers, and those who study government and scientific research. CIRM is unique in California history. Nationally, no other state has funded scientific research at the level that California has. It has done this uniquely using state bonds and a direct democracy tool called the Initiative. Patient advocates have gained a stronger voice at CERN. Even today, during the COVID-19 awards meeting, one could see their influence in the discussion of how to better serve the underserved communities. We should not forget that the agency also led the way nationally when it created standards for human embryonic stem cell research during CERN's earliest days. Preserving the CERN story digitally in a readable and accessible format should not be all that costly, and it would be a significant contribution to helping those who come after us learn about how this $3 billion effort came about and navigated with considerable success through the early days of what some may ultimately call the stem cell revolution. It would be a sad day if the complete record of the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine is not preserved for posterity. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, David. And as I said, I think that's a very interesting recommendation you have. Let me just ask you, since I have the floor for a moment, how would you proceed to do this, and what kind of format and by whom? Just any suggestions you might have.
Well, there's formal ways of archiving material, and there are people that do this with some regularity. But simply downloading the complete website would be the start. All of that information is public already. There's material on Facebook. I was just looking at all the incredible material that has been put up on the Facebook site that should be preserved. Videos and that really give a human touch to all of the much drier material. And some of that can be just backed up by conventional means, loading it into a hard drive, but it has to be in a format that's accessible to all people, and may take a little bit of conversion. It would need some, looking into with perhaps somebody at the state library who is familiar with archiving documents so that they're easily accessible.
Thank you. I appreciate those suggestions. So I think that is something we should definitely look into. I'm not sure at this point. We need to take up committee time to do that. But perhaps in the back.
This is Oz. I really just wanted to jump in just for a second. I do want to take up committee time by just saying, Mr. Jensen, I think that's a fantastic idea, and I hope that you have it written down and will forward that for board consideration. Everything that you said, I think, is absolutely spot on, and something that is important to preserve both the accomplishments of CERN, but also, as you said, the totally unique features of this thing in terms of its genesis and organization and really everything. So thank you for bringing it up. Great idea.
Yes, I would echo that, Oz. So my thought was to ask management to maybe come forward to the board sometime here in the very near future, maybe at the meeting the end of this month, just with their suggestions or proposal, in essence, for capturing the history of CERN and its implications for California and the greater society, so that can be preserved. So I would ask maybe Maria Milan if somebody could be given that as a responsibility to follow up on.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you for those comments. In shorthand, there was an item in there in Wind Down Cost that talks about public channels for communicating scientific and clinical. And that was, just shorthand for how are we gonna preserve this and maintain that important, not just history, but access of the public to continued research and all of the programs that was made possible with direct funding. So we'll come up with that, and that's part of kind of the list of different closeout programs, but we could report back in terms of the general idea behind that in that area. Thank you.
Steve, Jeff has comments.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. Actually, this is very simple. And thanks, Dave, for raising this. Materials from my activist days are archived at Bancroft at Berkeley. So this is very simple. We just need to contact the various university libraries and perhaps select one. I think it probably should be a UC, frankly. So it becomes, so it's clear it's a public resource. When I was archived, they did it as actually, there were LGBT students who were interested, and they were the ones who did it as a project. But archiving is what they do, and even if we have to provide some money to do so, I think it's an outstanding idea. And really, being in a library, in a university library archive will mean that all the data is collected. It's all in an organized format, and scholars will be able to make use of it for decades to come.
Jeff, thank you for that.
Steve,
Is there any other public
Art
comment on the motion? Sorry, is there any other public comment directly on the motion to approve the budget?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
I can. Who's the public comment from?
It's Art Torres. It was hard for me to get recognized earlier.
Oh, okay. I asked Maria for hands and she said there weren't any. So
Well,
go ahead.
I'm operating from a cell phone because I couldn't get access to a laptop.
All right. Go ahead, Art.
Well, first of all, I want to thank David for an excellent suggestion. Many of the state archives have included members of the legislature that they've chosen to archive. I was one of them, and it was a great interview of 3 to 5 days, which made you remember all the past. I don't recall that we've ever archived an agency or an institution, but this certainly merits an opportunity to review it, and I would like to be part of any effort to do so. In fact, when I assume my role as a regent on July 1st, it's a perfect opportunity to start discussions with the University of California archive system to see how perhaps they might be interested in putting this kind of archive together. So I would love to follow that up with Maria.
Great. Thank you, Art. I'd like to, however, turn now directly to the motion that's on the table, which is to approve the proposed budget for the coming fiscal year. So is there any public comment regarding that, or any board comment that I've missed regarding that motion? Hearing none, seeing none. Maria, would you call the roll?
Steve Julesgaard,
Yes.
Jeff Sheehy,
Yes.
Oz Stewart, Oz,
Sorry, yes.
Jonathan Thomas,
yes.
Art Torres,
Aye.
Christina Vori.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you, Maria. All right. So with that then, is there any other topic that any member of the board would like to bring before the Finance Subcommittee? Hearing none, seeing none, is there any topic that any member of the public would like to present to the Finance Subcommittee? Hearing none, seeing none, then is there a motion that the meeting be adjourned?
So moved. Christina.
Second?
Second.
Seconded. All right, all in favor? Turn off your screens. All right, I assume where everybody's in favor. Thank you very much. See you at the end of the month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
We
you.
all are way too painfully aware this COVID